We need to talk about ideas, good ones and bad ones. We need to learn stuff about the world. We need an honest, intelligent, thought-provoking, and entertaining review of what the hell happened on this planet in the last 7 days. We need to sit back and listen to the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Well, hello, dear listener. We are back, the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove, with a full cast of characters. I'm Trevor, the Iron Fist, over there in regional Queensland on the screen. Scott, the Velvet Glove. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you. G'day, Trevor. G'day, Joe. G'day, listeners. Hope everyone's doing well.
And Joe, the tech guy, with us again.
Evening all.
Yeah. So we're back. It's been a couple of weeks. What's on the agenda? We'll be talking about... Well, since Scott hasn't been with us since the election, we'll do a bit of a wrap on the election again and the long-term effects or consequences of that election. So we'll get onto that. A bit about Gaza, of course, and the latest atrocities that have been predicted and just are inevitable, but keep happening. How's the world responding to that? Superannuation tax. Scott, we'll get onto that one. You should be across all that, I would have thought. Maybe, yes.
I don't have over $3 million in my superannuation, but you know.
Do you not?
You're sneaking up there.
No, I'm not sneaking up. It's just one of those things. It's anyway. I'll talk to you about it once you get talking to it.
We get to that one. Okay. So So we'll see how this episode goes. A little bit underprepared, dear listener. I have stupidly signed up as a chairperson of a large body corporate on the Gold Coast, and man, oh man, is it a job. And the emails have just been flying into my inbox, and they're long and lengthy and complicated, and I don't know a lot about what's going on, and boy, oh boy, is it taking up a lot of time. So podcasts over the next few weeks might be a little bit sketchy until I get a grip on this role, so we'll see how we go. But anyway, back to we'll kick off with Scott. Your general election thoughts. You want to just want to riff on the election and the performance of everybody. Any?
I was surprised that Albanese was returned with an increased majority. I honestly thought that he would get back in, but only with the support of the Greens or the Teals. The Greens vote has collapsed, and they are finished now. And
hang on, didn't you listen to my previous episodes?
Yeah, I did listen to.
Wasn't that bad?
I did listen to your previous episodes. However, the whole point is that we've got a preferential voting system in this country. Now, what they relied upon was that they relied on the ALP coming third to them.
Yes, but
this time round they came third, which means the Liberals actually preferenced the ALP more than the Greens. And that's where that's why they collapsed in the House of Representatives.
So the vote didn't actually collapse.
No, it didn't actually collapse. The vote.
It was enough of a little trigger to rearrange things to have a collapse in the.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things.
13% of the votes overall.
Yeah, I know. The actual vote didn't collapse. Okay. That's why they've held their own in the Senate, and they've what's the word I'm groping for? No, it's all gone. It's just they've held their own in the Senate, and they've now positioned themselves that they can, the coalition vote has fallen across the whole lot. And the
Liberals has fallen. The Nationals, I believe, have the same number of seats as they had before.
Yeah, that's right. But the coalition was basically headed by the Liberal Party. The National Party were allegedly the junior party.
And now they've got more MPs.
Yeah, I know. They haven't got more MPs. They've still got, they've probably got more MPs as a percentage of the party, but they are still the minority party of the coalition.
Yes.
And the way they've been behaving over the coalition and everything, over the coalition agreement, it makes me think that David Littleproud thinks that he's now the senior boss of the coalition rather than the junior party.
It's certainly a tail wagging the dog.
Oh, God, yeah, it is. Because they will not walk away from 7 government-owned nuclear reactors. You know, they're convinced that's the right way to go. Well, you know, I think that the Liberal Party has recognised that they lost the election, not principally because of their support for nuclear power, but in large part to their support for nuclear power. The other thing was Dutton he was wholly ineffectual. He opened his mouth and just shot himself in the foot every time he did. And Jane Hume has paid the price for that in the redirection of the new shadow cabinet. She's lost her position there because of the working from home debacle. But, you know, I don't believe it was entirely her. I think it was probably more him than anyone else that said this is the way we should go. And what we're hearing, though, is that it was very much a top-down leadership, that everything he said was the way it went. And that was the result. I was pleased to see he lost his own seat. That was good.
Not nearly as pleased as Joe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, not nearly as pleased as Joe. But, you know, it's just one of those things. I was very glad to see that he left. So he's out of the way now. And we don't actually have a history of former opposition leaders writing books, though, do we? It's basically prime ministers.
Yeah, I don't know. But
so which consulting firm is he going to end up at?
Yeah, well,
he will end up somewhere. He will end up doing something. Now, I imagine that he will try and follow his mate Scott Morrison into some sort of consulting firm for the military so he can play the big tough man. But then he may well have licked enough asses and that sort of stuff so he can end up on the coal in the coal company somewhere. It's just good away. Oh, he might even end up working for Gina Reinhardt. Yeah, you never know. You know, because she certainly loved him.
Or maybe ambassador to America.
You know, well, that would require a future
Liberal government, which I think is not going to. I think that we're not going to see that for at least 9 years, I would have thought.
Yes, let's talk a little bit about that because Kos Samaras is a sort of a pollster commentator.
Yeah, he's got some very interesting stuff actually.
And there was an article in the Australian Financial Review. So things to consider long term about how does the Liberal Party get back into power. So the next election won't be till 2028. Well, if it goes the full term. By then, another 700,000 Gen Z voters will have joined the electoral roll, and the coalition doesn't get many votes out of that mob. They only get 1 in 5.
I wonder why.
Yes, funny that.
And how many boomers are going to die between now and 2028?
Quite a lot. And by 2028, only 25% of enrolled Australians will be baby boomers or older. So the demographics are just working against the Liberal Party. And so on that election, May 3rd, the coalition lost at least 12 seats that they didn't even have on their danger list. So Electoral Commission says a marginal seat is one that's held by less than 6%. And at the next election, Labor will be defending only about 20 seats that are deemed marginal. So that's only a quarter of their MPs will be in marginal seats. If Liberals at the next election managed a uniform 6% swing, then they'd pick up just 16 extra seats, restoring them to where they were prior to the last election. And that's if they got a 6% swing. But the way the demographics are working, with Gen Z hating them and their only constituency, the baby boomers, dying or through dementia unable to vote, where are they going to get these people from? Oh, and that would be a 6% swing, which would be a huge swing. That's just to get them back to where they were prior to the last election. The last time there was a swing of more than 5.5% was in the 1975 election. Well, Malcolm Fraser got 7.4 to defeat Gough Whitlam. So a 6% swing would be extraordinary, and that would only get them back to where they were before this last election. So they're looking at least 2 election cycles, but you'd have to say with the demographics working the way it is, there has to be some complete remodelling of the Liberal Party to have to be under some fundamental cataclysmic change in what they do to turn it around.
You're very right there. There have been a few Liberal women that have been actually hitting the airwaves lately. And they are starting to say through very gritted teeth that perhaps it's time to embrace quotas. Well, I just think that you've got to actually look at the history of quotas and that sort of stuff. Now, the ALP almost tore themselves apart over quotas, but they did implement them. They did swallow the bad pill and everything else, and they implemented them. And now they've got 57% of their members are women.
The problem with the Liberals is the women they get are as nutty as the blokes.
Yeah, I know. They are.
I don't think it's so much the gender is they manage to just then find the nutty women to take up the places who possibly have to be even more nuttier in order to overcome the hurdles of. So gender's not going to cut it.
I know it's not going to cut it.
It's policy that has to cut it, and they are so. The problem is,
you mean you're not going to vote for Senator Price because she's
a woman,
black and Indigenous?
Yeah, but they've got the same problem as the Republicans, where the party faithful who are involved in pre-selections are completely mad, and that's what's happening in the Liberal Party branches. They're completely mad in there. They're more radical than the politicians.
Oh, yeah,
they're not going for. They're just watching Sky News and getting high on that stuff, and so they're not going to vote in moderate. They're not going to pre-select moderate candidates. So it's going to require some sort of change in Liberal Party membership in order to change that party, which isn't going to happen. I can't imagine it happening.
Well, it's like one of those things, you've got to actually, there was a woman that was from the Liberal Party and that sort of stuff. I can't remember who she was, but she was a lady that tried to set up a women's liberal movement. I can't even remember what the name of the organisation was. But she said that the average Australian voter is 37 years old and a female. Whereas the average Liberal Party member is 73 years old and a male. It's just that even when I was there, which is a few years ago now, it was very hard to find anyone that didn't have completely grey hair, if they had hair at all. It's just I don't know what the hell they're going to do. They've got to do something. Otherwise, I know, Joe, you don't have any hair.
If he did, it'd be great.
Yeah, exactly. It's, I just don't know what the hell they're going to do, but they have to do something. Otherwise, you could end up seeing the Labor Party governing the country for years yet, and that's not good for anyone. You've got to have a decent, credible opposition. That you've got to have something that's worth throwing rocks at.
It's going to have to be a new party. The Liberal Party cannot reform. It's like saying the Republican Party could reform. It's beyond reform. And so it will have to be a complete collapse at the next election, and the remnants of the teal type people saying, let's create a new teal party which will attract Liberals.
Or maybe because Labour has moved so far right, they become the right-wing party, and we have the Greens as the opposition.
Yes, that's another way. But there's a certain segment who'll just never be satisfied with those socialist Labour. They'll think they're
yes, but then they'll be voting for the crazy right-wing nut jobs, won't they?
Yes, and of course, all the while, people like Peter Credlin and
Tony Abbott.
Tony Abbott are all working along in
the shadows, trying
to drag them further right.
Yes,
if
you're given the job of fixing it, you look at it and say it's impossible.
it's one of those things. I don't know whose idea it was to actually coax Jacinta Nampijinpa Price out from the National Party over to the Liberals.
It was Tony Abbott.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Mm.
And I have heard that before now that I actually think about it. But that made zero sense whatsoever. All they did was just piss off the National Party.
Yes.
And, you know,
These people genuinely believe she was an extraordinary talent.
I know that, but you know, she was okay. She had a win on the Constitution, but that's it.
Yeah.
You know, that's all she actually did.
Yeah.
You know, I just don't see that she was brilliant.
Yeah, no,
You know,
far from it.
She wasn't anything spectacularly brilliant. She was
going to be our Elon Musk. She was going to run the Ministry of Government Efficiency.
Yeah, I know, which would have been absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, a Timo Doge, perhaps.
Yeah, Timu Doge. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
because they called him a Timu Republican, didn't they?
Well, I know that Susan Lee was the Timu Liz Truss.
Who is this?
She was the Timu Liz Trust, so a cheap version
Susan
of-
Lee. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, you're actually saying it the way her name is spelled, Susan. Yeah, Susan.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's I know she was the Timu Liz Truss and everything else, but you know, having heard her speak and everything else, I think to myself, maybe she's not as big as nut as you originally think. But then, you know, I just don't know whether or not to trust her, because she certainly seems to be saying the right things, but she's not got a strong position in Parliament. You know, apparently at least two of her votes came from senators that have since lost their seats. So now they're down to it's 1-1, isn't it, on the numbers? So if that idiot, God, what was his name?
So she got the support of 3 Liberal senators who are retiring in July.
Or they lost their seats or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, they only managed to vote in the election because they only managed to vote in the leadership ballot because they currently have their seat, but they are losing their seats in July. Now, I don't know how they're losing their seats, whether they've lost their seats through the election or whether or not they've hit retirement age or what have you. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, it must be because of the changeover from this vote. It doesn't take effect till July.
Yeah, it doesn't take effect till July.
But they still voted in the...
Yeah.
That's weird, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, they were allowed to vote because they were the members of Parliament. Now, I'm not sure what happened with Bradfield, but has Bradfield actually been declared yet?
In my notes, that's what I've got.
So
the Liberals lost Bradfield by 40 votes.
So they did actually lose the seat, did they?
Yes.
So Nicolette Bowles got that seat.
So back in 2016, which is not that long ago, 9 years, they held it, the Liberals, 71-29. So it was their safest seat, and 9 years later they lose it. That's incredible. Amazing.
It is
because of all that dark money that Climate 2000 or whatever they're called have funneled into the seat.
No, Joe, it was because they didn't go hard enough to the right.
Oh, sorry.
Didn't represent
right.
true Liberal values. The people didn't know what they were. They were Labor light, Joe. That was why they That's why they failed.
Yeah, talking of retirement, did you see, I think it was the Courier Fail, did a big thing about how Dutton is on 300 grand a year for the rest of his life, which I was very surprised that they were sticking the knife in.
Yeah. Yeah, they'll do that occasionally when it doesn't matter. So, yeah.
Really, he's on 300,000 a year for the rest of his life.
Because he's been in Parliament quite a long time. So he's one of the...
24 years.
He sort of benefits under a scheme that's stopped. So it's not as generous.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think Albanese is another one who's on the same sort of scheme.
Probably.
And there's not many others left who are.
No, exactly, because the new ones that have come in have actually had to What am I trying to say? They've got to go onto the same sort of system that the rest of us are on, which
Yeah.
is basically a defined
Well, an accumulation fund rather than
an accumulation fund rather than a defined benefit fund. Yes,
Yeah.
you're quite right.
Yeah. Well, while we're talking about funds, Scott, shall we fast forward to the superannuation tax?
Yeah, sure.
So the federal government is hoping to pass a bill to impose a 15% tax on super balances higher than $3 million. That's going to affect about 1 in every 200 savers. And if you watch Sky News or read the Courier Mail,
Yeah, they're
it's
all
going to be the end of the world.
Yeah, I know. They're all losing their minds over it.
Yes.
I don't really have any sort of problem with it. The Greens want to drop it down to $2 million and all that sort of stuff.
What? The Greens wanted to drop it to 2 million? I never saw that, did they?
Well, that's one of the things that actually been I've heard from one of the things I was listening to on a podcast.
I can't.
Apparently, they wanted it to $2 million.
They thought 3 million was oh,
too generous.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. That makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah, they
yes.
thought it was too generous, so they wanted to drop it down to $2 million.
Okay, that makes sense.
I
yes.
would have thought that if you wanted to actually do that, what you ought to be actually arguing for is you drop it down to $2 million, but you've got to index it. Because now $2 million is something that we can only dream of right now. But if you're 18 years old and you're starting work and you've got just the superannuation contributions going into your account, and you do occasionally top it up just a little bit, then you can end up, then $2 million is not something out of the realms of possibility. But if you have it $2 million today and you index it, then that wouldn't be a problem as far as I'm concerned.
So that's
It's
a criticism that this limit is not indexed.
Exactly.
But it's always open to any parliament at any time to say, we'll start indexing it.
I know.
So,
I understand that, but the Labor Party said they don't want to index it.
yeah,
And I
and
don't
at some
know
point
why.
down the track, they could put in indexing. So, the whole thing about superannuation, well, the other part of it, of course, is that it's going to be on unrealised capital gains.
Yeah.
So if a valuation, if, for example, you've got a wheat farm in your superannuation fund or something, maybe a large property or something like that. That's
I was going to say 2 million isn't actually that much for a
3 million.
3 million. Sorry.
Yeah, so you've got an expensive property in there, and
A large farm, I think, would be 3 million.
Yeah, and you're renting it out, perhaps. So you've got a large asset which increases in value, and you haven't sold it, but it's increased in value. You're going to be taxed on that increase, even though you haven't sold it. And people are saying, well, that's unfair because these poor people may not have the money available to pay the tax bill and might have to find the money somewhere.
Crimea River. Sell
Might
their
be
assets.
forced to sell. The whole point of superannuation is it is a little haven where you put away enough money to provide you with a comfortable retirement. That's all that you're supposed to be able to put in there, and we'll give you tax advantages if you do. And it's supposed to be something that will provide an income stream for you in your retirement. So if you're stupid enough to put in, or greedy enough, or inflexible enough to put in a large inflexible asset into a system designed to provide you with an income stream, don't go crying that you've been taxed on something where you haven't actually, where you're short of cash, because the idea of the scheme is to provide an income stream. So yeah.
Similar things been going on in the UK with talking about farms, where farms were exempt from inheritance tax.
Right.
But it was only farms worth over a couple of £1 million. And all of the farmers are up in arms, protesting in the streets. And really, it's wealthy businessmen who've bought themselves a hobby farm as a way to hide money away from death duties.
Yes. for the majority of Australians, the vast majority are putting their super is in shares and other collections of various assets which are easily sold to pay tax bills, and the vast majority are not getting over 3 million. And so this is a bunch of whinging for people who have got lots of wealth tucked away in a tax haven with unusual assets stashed away. So don't put it in super if you can't be flexible with it and you've got over 3 million. So
Well, I just think
mix
to
it up a
myself,
bit.
they've got to actually look at why they put the money into super. You know, I think they've actually tried to get around it and that sort of stuff. They've tried to actually make it so that they can pass it on to the next generation and all that type of thing.
In the chat room, Alison said Bradfield's not decided yet. So everything we said about that, put asterisk with a maybe. And David in the chat room says politicians hate indexing. There would be no bracket creep with tax if there was indexing, but they love to do tax cuts. Same thing applies to the proposed superannuation changes. Okay.
Yeah, I suppose they might actually end up sort of at some stage saying once the average superannuation ends up at around about $3 million, they might actually say, well, we're going to increase it to $3.5 million or $4 million. You never know.
Yeah. So,
but I would have thought that with this change and everything else, it's going to actually slow the amount of money going into superannuation, because if you're looking like you're going to end up at $3 million, you then got to actually work out, is 30% still lower than your current income
marginal
tax rate?
Yep.
Yeah. If it is lower than your marginal tax rate, you'll still drop it up. But if it's higher, then you're going to think to yourself, well, I don't need to actually do that anymore.
And you got to remember, this is 3 million per person. So for couples,
That's $6
we're
million.
really talking they can accumulate together 6 million before this kicks in. So that's also to be taken into account. Here are some pertinent numbers. So as at December 31st, 2024, so we're really talking here where you've got an asset that can't be sold to meet a tax liability because it's a large inflexible asset. That's going to be in a self-managed superannuation fund of some sort, because industry-managed, normal superannuation funds are people's accounts are your usual shares and a bit of cash and maybe interest in infrastructure projects or things, but all sort of share-based type assets. So, but in self-managed super funds, that's where people will try to put expensive paintings and holiday houses at Torquay or something like that. So, so those self-managed super funds, they account for. There's only. Let me see here.
Well, if you're saying there's 1 in 200 people, that's 10,000 Australians.
Yes, not many.
It's really not. It's not. If you just listen to Sky News, then it's the end of the earth. But it's not. I think the only people that might be losing their sleep over it is people like Gina Reinhardt.
So your standard super, there's about 4 trillion in that. Your special self-managed super funds has got 1 trillion, but 94% of people are in the regular funds, while only 6% are in these self-managed funds. So
6% of people have 25% of the assets.
In super, correct.
Yep.
Yeah, in these large self-managed super funds, that would be typically
Actually,
the ones
it's
affected by
20%.
this. Yeah. So where are we here? So really, we've got a case where self-managed super funds have been taking advantage of the generous rules to move substantial wealth into self-managed super funds. And the whole idea of it should be put enough in there that your average Aussie can have a comfortable and enjoyable retirement. And anything beyond that, too bad. Anyway, uproar.
Well, you probably want to be aiming at the top 10% of whatever. anybody who's in the top 10% bracket of income, superannuation, assets, you probably want to be looking very closely at taxing them.
Yeah.
I agree.
Sounds very socialist, but that's the way that its system should work. Gaza. I think we should talk about Gaza
Never heard of
again.
it.
So bloody depressing what's
Well,
going on over there. It's just
Clearly, Joe, you've been reading mainstream media, so you've heard nothing about it. Scott, what's your thoughts on Gaza?
No, I think the Israelis are just behaving so brutally. You know, it's 6 months ago I said I think the Palestinians have had enough. You know,
Why do you hate the Jews so much?
I don't hate the Jews. It's just I just think to myself that they have behaved so appallingly badly towards the Palestinians that all they've done is they have created the next generation of Hamas fighters already, because these young boys that are going to grow up without any parents because they've both been blown apart, they're going to get adopted by Hamas, and they're going to get told from day one that you're an orphan because the bloody Jews killed your parents, and that, you know, Palestine from the river to the sea shall be free. And it's just I just cannot believe that the Israelis cannot see what they're doing, that they're just creating a new generation of Hamas fighters.
Once you wipe out all the Palestinians, problem solved.
See, your theory there, Scott, relies on those children growing up, whereas they drop bombs on them and assassinate them as they're playing in the dirt streets outside the tents that they've been forced into. So the Israeli theory would be these kids are not going to grow up and become terrorists because we're going to kill them all or starve them all, and they'll die that way. So that's the theory they're working on. Really, what we've got to now in the world is just the world's eyes have opened up to the whole sort of racist, genocidal state of Israel, where we maybe didn't look too closely and we thought, oh, liberal Western democracy, savage Arab Muslims, sympathies lie with the Westerners. But now, after all this, there's an enormous tide has turned against Israel.
I find it somewhat amusing, actually, that you've got the Canadians and the British and the French and everyone else are actually saying that you've actually got to pull your head in. You've got to stop killing so many Palestinians. I find it very hard to believe that they weren't aware of everything that was going on 18 months ago.
Do you know, I reckon these people are so goddamn stupid. Like Penny Wong and that mob, like when right at the beginning when Israel said, oh, UNRWA is full of Hamas operatives, and they said, right, we're withdrawing aid for UNRWA. You know, I think they're that stupid that they actually believe it. I don't think these people have a lot of time to actually get briefed about news that isn't fed to them by a very narrow funnel of intelligence that they get. So anyway, what have we got to say? Like last time we spoke about Gaza, we were talking about the impending starvation because on the 2nd of March, we're now on 2nd of June, so 3 full months, 100% of Gaza is now at risk of famine, according to United Nations. So there was a total siege from the 2nd of March. And on the 19th of May, a few hundred food trucks were allowed in for 2 million plus people. So they have been starving the poor people of Gaza. And just in the last day, basically they released some food to these people at these designated spots. This one was the Rafah Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distribution hub, basically a spot that the Israelis determined in some dusty part of the world, set up a bunch of gates and said to the Gazans, line up here for a measly fraction of what your entire population requires. So, as described in this tweet, Israel purposefully starves people, forces them to come to a single crowded spot to get a bag of flour, and then guns them down in broad daylight. Shot dozens of people who were in those lines. And David Shoebridge, the Greens senator, says, this regime kills people queuing for aid after forcing them to choke points by starvation. And he says we must end the two-way arms trade and introduce sanctions and free Palestine. So they're starving. A small, minuscule amount of food is allowed in, and then they get shot for lining up. It's just unbelievable. And
it's terribly, terribly cruel.
yeah.
It's just... It
and you see nothing of this in the mainstream news. You can pick up that fucking Courier Mail and there's nothing in it.
Because it doesn't fit with their proprietor's worldview. It's one of those things, like, I just don't understand. Like, I saw a thing just on Instagram just recently. It was a Jewish actress who was saying Hitler has made us right. The Jewish government has made Hitler right.
Yes.
Because everything that Hitler was saying is exactly what the Jews are now, was exactly what the Israelis are doing.
Yeah.
Now it's not the Jews, it's the Israelis, which is a very different sort of thing to say.
Yep.
And, it's
the Zionists. I mean, there are some Israelis who
have a conscience.
Small, yes. It seems a small fraction of the population. It seems the majority of the population is still in favour of what their government's doing. Actually, on that score, I've got a clip here by Mearsheimer, who's been quoted on various things, Professor Mearsheimer. So I'll just play this clip because it's relevant to what we're saying.
I don't see any evidence that there's an uprising in the Israeli public against the genocide. There are lots of protests in Israel, but those protests have to deal with the hostages and relations between the IDF and the government, but they don't have to do with stopping the genocide. I mean, you want to file all of this under the Nazification of Israel. That's where it should be filed. This is a country that's gone completely off the rails. And the more that you see it in operation, the more it looks like the Germans under Hitler. This is just hard to believe. We're talking about eradicating all of the Palestinians in Gaza, murdering them. This is hard to believe. This is the sort of things that the Germans did. It's supposed to be never again. I don't see any evidence that people in Israel believe in the principle of never again, certainly when it applies to the Palestinians. And people in the West are hardly lifting a finger. This is a categorically reprehensible.
When you see polling done of the views of people living in Israel as to approval or disapproval of what's happening, some pretty ugly statistics of the level of approval for the wiping out of the Palestinians. It's pretty darn ugly. When we do see news, it's massaged. So typically, say, the New York Times would have a headline, Israel seeks to clear much of northern Gaza, warning of dangerous combat to come, which should really be Israel seeks to ethnically cleanse northern Gaza, warning of more mass killing to come.
Oh, you saw the whole, they've just permitted another or legalised 30 new enclaves in Palestinian land.
The settlers in the West Bank.
Yeah, well, some of it was the West Bank, but there were other places as well, I thought.
Right, yep. Not surprised. Did you see that documentary by Thoreau?
Not yet. I've been looking for a copy of it.
It shouldn't be hard to find. They're out and about.
Okay. I did get the BBC documentary that was taken down.
Right. Did it get taken down, did it?
No, not that one. There was another one.
Right. So the Thoreau one's very interesting where he's talking to the settlers and it's just damning, the words that come out of the mouths of these settlers as they're just...
Those settlers are a breed apart.
Yeah.
You know, they are utterly disgusting people, the way they treat the Palestinians.
It kind of reminds me of the white South Africans.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a very dehumanising view of
the other humans. It's I saw something on last week tonight, which is just a comedy show and everything else, but they're actually talking about the way the settlers treat the Palestinians.
Mm.
You know, they were throwing empty beer bottles out of their windows, smashing down, so they'd smash on the courtyard where they were just meeting and that type of thing. It's really bloody crook what they're doing.
But then idiots will tell you, Israel is a democratic state. They allow the Palestinians the right to vote. But that's only the Palestinians in the main territory of Israel, where they are outnumbered.
Yeah.
And if so they're allowed to vote because their vote doesn't count. But all of the people in the West Bank and the occupied territories, they don't get to vote about the group that is occupying them and controlling them. So, even Frank was sort of arguing, but, Israel's a democratic state. Well, fuck off. Like, that's not a proper democracy. And it just doesn't – I don't care if you're a democracy. America's a democracy as such and commits atrocities around the world. Just because you're a democracy doesn't mean anything anyway. But I've digressed.
It's all right. It won't be a democracy for much longer.
Yeah.
The US, this is.
Yes.
Well, it certainly looks that way, doesn't it?
Yeah. But, the New York Times will do a headline. Aid deliveries begin to reach Gazans after days of delays. UN said about 90 truckloads of supplies. Blah, blah, blah. Significant influx.
90 truckloads is bugger all compared to what they actually need.
Whereas someone like the BBC says that's a different headlines, but another one had a headline, only 100 trucks have entered Gaza after 11 weeks of total blockade and imminent mass starvation. That's what the New York Times headline should be. Or UN says Gaza in cruelest phase of war as 9,000 trucks worth of aid ready at border. So this is trucks sitting there, 9,000 ready, and the goddamn Israelis are starving these poor Palestinians. So we're now in the dystopian world where The Onion, with its headlines, is factually more correct than the New York Times. And The Onion headline was, Israel warns Gaza still harbouring hundreds of doctors. Because they are targeting doctors, dear listener. They actually target medical workers and their families.
Did you see that link I sent you?
I looked at most of the links you sent me, Joe.
The Bellingcat one, where they analysed the audio from the ambulance shooting.
Yes.
Saying that, basically from the audio they analysed because you can hear the crack of the shot and then the bang of the gun. And you can time the difference because the shot goes so supersonic as it goes past whatever's hearing it. And the gun travels, the sound from the gun travels at 300 metres a second. And so they're saying that there were no shots from the audio fired back in the direction of the Israeli troops. All of the shots were fired in the direction of the ambulance. And just talking about the rate of shots and said basically they just opened fire and didn't stop.
The evidence is such, it's just not controversial. The worst of the atrocities that are happening are there's no rational ability to sort of discount what's going on. We all know what's going on, and just Israel denies doesn't cut it. There's so much video evidence by all sorts of people, including the Israelis themselves, that the level of this atrocity is not in question, yet bugger all is being done by the West, and in particular our weak so-called left-wing Australian government. So Albanese...
He has actually said something just recently, but it's
words
just
are
not
cheap.
enough.
Words are cheap, Scott.
Yeah, I know, but what else? It's... He was asked by a journalist, "Do you think it's time for sanctions?" And he said, "Well, what do you want me to sanction?" And he said, "Well, I don't know." Well, I just don't think anyone knows the answer to that. I would believe that Husak's probably got the right. He's probably got the right idea. Where I just think you should have you should end all military sales and everything to Israel right now. And then after that, you should actually start to sanction some of the members of the Netanyahu government and members of the military high command too. I just think you've got to start by doing that. And then after that, you can work out, okay, is that going to work? No, it's not going to work. So let's move on to the next lot of sanctions.
Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we don't trade a single grain of wheat with Israel.
No.
We still ban sales of everything and imports of everything. It wouldn't matter if our trade was zero with them. It's obviously something. But we should just be initially saying...
we buy a lot of useful military tech from them.
Yeah, so we should stop that. And we should stop, Israeli citizens, for example, from travelling. So there's all sorts of things we can do. We can declare that if Netanyahu ever steps foot in the country...
He'll be arrested.
We'll follow what the ICC
But then the
wants.
Americans will invade.
Yeah, well, they probably will, but that's what we should say. So that's
It's
weak
one of those
of,
things. I just think
weak of Albanese and weak of that reporter to go, I don't know.
Netanyahu he can't really travel anywhere though in any of the Western countries that actually said that they will actually abide by the direction of the International Criminal Court, haven't they?
Oh, there's a mixture of different groups who have said they'll arrest him and others will say they won't. So,
okay.
Yeah. So, Albanese, it's outrageous that there'd be a blockade of food and supplies to people who are in need in Gaza. People are starving, and the idea that a democratic state withholds supply is an outrage. I have an issue with this where it's like only democracies are capable of morality. Anyway. One thing I will go back to is just on this reporting of it, I've mentioned... and so Albanese comes out with basically it's outrageous that there's a food blockade. People are starving. We're not happy. And Sky News, Shari Markson, says Prime Minister's comments blasting Israel as it attempts to bring home more than 50 hostages is outrageous and yet another case of rising anti-Israel sentiment, according to Sky News host Shari Markson. So this is the shit that is on Sky News and is being fed to our boomers every bloody day of the week. Crap from a woman like that. Oh, for God's sake. Oh, and I've got friends who quote that woman on all sorts of issues. Oh, it's embarrassing for them.
It is.
Meanwhile, the ABC is not much better when it comes to Gaza. So this was an interesting article, John Menadue blog, by a guy called Richard Bean. He's an academic and data scientist. You'll see what the data scientist aspect is in a moment. So in December, this is him writing. In December 2024, I presented an analysis of more than 450 interviews concerning Palestine and Israel on ABC Radio National Breakfast since October 7th, 2023. So a bit over a year and a couple of months. During that period, the host, Patricia Cavalis, was the host. Hey, Scott, are you typing away? Is that Scott or are you? I could just hear a lot of typing. Anyway, or clicking.
I'm not
maybe.
typing. I was
maybe
clicking.
The mouse.
Oh, okay.
I was clicking, which is my fault.
Sorry about that. Where was I up to? So, during that period, relative to Palestinian guests, there were a lot more Israeli guests featured in those 14 months. Since Sally Sarah took over on the 16th of December, there have been 90... he just says, during that period of Patricia Cavalis, Israeli guests were featured more than twice as often as Palestinian guests during the 14-month period. So a 2-to-1 ratio of hearing from Israeli guests as opposed to Palestinian guests on our ABC. Sally Sarah took over in December. There were 93 interviews on the same subject, and there were 33 Israeli guests, but only 12 Palestinians. So just sheer numbers in terms of guests, completely biased in favour of the Israelis over the Palestinians. And as he says here that another concerning aspect is what's going on there? Scott, no? What are you doing, Scott? You
Smashing the place up.
I just bumped something off my bottom of my desk, so I just leaned over to pick it up. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's okay. I'm looking at this. It just sounded like you were cooking on a wok or something.
No, I'm not cooking anything.
Okay, back to this article. The repeated invitation of guests from the Washington, D.C.-based Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a think tank that effectively acts as Israeli government front group. So a lot of that happening at the same time. But what he goes on with the host reaction when a guest mentions an Israeli genocide is usually to interrupt and mention that Israel contests this. So this has happened 5 of 7 times. But this does not occur when a guest alleges similar conduct by Hamas. So the ABC has not been consistent in its approach to it. So, so he's saying it's a breach of their rule of impartiality. If it's good for one, it's good for the other. In this particular case, the evidence of a genocide is overwhelming, and following the weight of evidence in this case requires the ABC to revisit or revise its policy of having hosts constantly interrupt guests who state that Israel's conduct is genocidal. Scott, do you think if a guest is on the ABC and a guest says blah, 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 and the genocide that Israel's causing here in Gaza, blah, 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 should the host jump in and say Israel denies it's a genocide?
No.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
just
think
is?
so. I just think that it is genocidal what they're doing.
Mm.
You know, it just, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, well, it's a bloody duck.
Mm.
So as far as I'm concerned, I think that Israel should be called out for behaving in a genocidal way. You know?
We've reached that point, haven't we? Where
I don't think there's any other way you can look at it except to say that it is genocidal. You know, they are deliberately targeting men, women, and children, and they're killing them.
Mm.
And you know, it's they appear to be targeting doctors too, which is something you did say before. Now, I heard a story on what had been on the ABC. They were talking about. No, it was an American podcast I was listening to. I couldn't remember which podcast it was, but I think it might have been. Anyway, it'll come back to me. Mm. They were talking about a doctor found out that his entire family had been killed by a bunker busting bomb. And he had 9 children that were killed, and his wife was also killed while he was actually trying to...
Worse than that, Scott. She was a pediatrician.
Yes, she was
and
a
he was a
paediatrician,
medical person.
Yeah,
He drops her off to work,
yeah.
goes back home.
To look after the kids.
Bomb lands on him and the kids, 9 of them, kills all of them except for one kid who's incredibly badly injured. And the bodies are taken to the hospital where the woman works, and she is trying to identify her deceased children, who are in such a state that they're basically unidentifiable. Can you imagine?
It's
Can you imagine?
It's one of those things that you just can't imagine. It's just so bloody cruel.
So that's the sort of targeting that's going on. And so our ABC, not much better than bloody Sky News for that matter. Now, there was a great interview that they did with Nasser Mashni, a Palestinian spokesman, and the ABC, after initially publishing it, pulled the interview, probably due to pressure from the Israeli lobby. And this is, we'll see how we go. We'll play a bit of it. This is the interview that is no longer available on the ABC because somebody deemed it inappropriate. But I reckon it's superb.
Now is Nasser Mashni, president of the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network. Good afternoon, Nasser.
Good afternoon, Kat.
Now, the Prime Minister has delivered what some would say are his strongest comments to date. What is your reaction to what you just heard?
We welcome the Prime Minister's stance and his language. And I would say to him, it's 596 days too late. We're on day 597 of what the International Court of Justice said was a plausible genocide. What we've got is world leaders now perhaps scrambling to clean up their legacies. He talked about Israel as being a democracy. This is not a democracy. It's a rogue apartheid genocidal state headed up by a war criminal. It's time for Australia to do more than just talk about words, but to put things in place like sanctions, like ending two-way military trade and cancelling our contract with Albert Systems that killed Australian aid worker Zomi Francon.
Okay, so just on some of the things that you're calling for there on the trade, this is a highly contested claim. The government insists that no weapons have been exported to Israel in the last 5 years.
Oh, well, we don't accept that. We've seen evidence presented by David Shoebridge and the Greens, Michael West Media, etc. Earlier on this year, we saw a weapon in the hands of an Israeli minister in Gaza that was manufactured in Queanbeyan. Australia is complicit in the weapons trade, in supplying, in supporting this genocide. It's time for us to end two-way military trade.
With respect to sanctions on Israel, we know that Australia hasn't signed up to that statement over the weekend. The Prime Minister says it's because the statement was by members of the G7. Is that fair?
Well, it's a G7 statement. There's nothing stopping us from going out on our own. There's nothing stopping us from like-minded countries joining. Spain said some stuff. Canada was part of that G7, and we've signed on with Canada previously. Australia needs not to be the last country to enact sanctions against this rogue apartheid state. We need to do the right thing. We took a leadership role in apartheid South Africa. We can take a leadership position in apartheid Israel.
We heard there that the Prime Minister said that he communicated his concerns and his criticisms to the Israeli President when he was most recently in Rome. Is that a step that you welcome?
Well, the reality is Israel hasn't listened. Our Foreign Minister urged Israel to show restraint in the very early stages. We've called upon Israel. Israel's not listening. It's a rogue state. It's time to treat it that way. And that includes sanctions, it includes recalling our ambassador, expelling the Israeli ambassador, and ensuring that fugitive, Benjamin Netanyahu, that fugitive war criminal, is held to account in The Hague.
What are your observations of the internal pressures that the government is facing over this?
I don't imagine there's that much internal pressure. I mean, we welcome former Minister Ed Husick's commentary over the weekend. The ALP has had a very strong position on Palestine, and it's held back for whatever reason. Perhaps it's been the Israel lobby, which we've seen to be impotent at the last election. It's time for the ALP to lean in to a more just position, to the elbow, quote-unquote, of old. It's time for Palestine to be free from the river to the sea. He knows what that means. We know what that means. It's equality and humanity for all people. in that geography, not just the Jewish people. No supremacy.
Nasser, apart from doing interviews and advocacy work through public media, what more will you do as president of the Australian Palestinian Advocacy Network to further your cause and your campaign?
Look, we're working with various advocacy groups, but also unions. That
was most of it. I thought he spoke really well. And for the people who are just listening and not watching, that showed images of just people lining up and just scrambling for food and images of disaster and all the rest of it. And there just is not enough of that. The ABC creates a great interview like that and pulls it because somebody complained. There we are. That's the state of the world that we're in.
Who would have complained?
Israel lobby would have said, he said from the river to the sea. Mm-hmm. Now, he gave an explanation of what he's saying that meant.
Yeah, his explanation made me feel a hell of a lot better because when he said from the river to the sea, I first winced at that.
Well, I was going to say it's been used in a different context.
But he gave it a context that he gave it. And, at the end of the day, I thought it was an interview well worth listening, and the fact that it gets pulled, criminal. That's how ABC. So there we go. There we go. Well, gentlemen, I think that's enough for this podcast. Have you got anything else you want to get off your chest?
Each other.
Yeah.
I've just discovered a former trader, London trader, called Gary Stevenson, who went to London School of Economics, went to Oxford University, studied economics, and he's a big proponent for taxing the rich, and he's a very well-spoken advocate. I mean, he definitely sounds like he came from the rough side of London. Mm-hmm. And, he's very wealthy now, having traded in London for 6 years or something. Mm-hmm. But arguing really, was it 20 trillion, 20 billion? I can't remember. It was a huge number of government cash was handed out during COVID lockdowns, and none of it went into the pocket of the average person. So where did it end up? Because the government doesn't have it, and he's arguing that it went into the pockets of the rich, and basically saying the additional wealth that these people have is forcing up asset prices, and most people's asset is their home, and that's why the earnings to house price ratio has shot up around the world. Is because the wealth is concentrated in more and more people, and more up the top, and they're using it to.
The top is getting access to cheap money.
Yeah, and they're using it to buy assets,
yep.
Including housing, which is forcing the price of houses up.
Yep. If you're getting money at 1% or 2%, you can buy assets that are returning 4%, and you're happy days. Yeah.
So he is very eloquent, and Krishnan Gurumurthy, who's a Channel 4 presenter, Ways to Change the World, is the podcast, but it's also up on YouTube as a video. And Gary Stevenson is the person I heard.
There you go, dear listener. Check that out. A recommendation from Joe the Tech Guy. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're sounding very bullshit there, Joe.
I'm sounding bullshit.
No, Joe's sounding very bullshit.
Yeah.
Taxing the rich. Absolutely. I'm a socialist.
Yeah, which is fine. It's just that it's one of those things. I just think to myself that unless the wealthy actually start to understand the lessons of history, then I honestly believe you could see some guillotines being busted
absolutely.
Off. I think that Elon Musk would probably be the first that they would behead in the United States.
Well, that's why they're all headed to space, because apparently guillotines don't work in space.
There we go.
Anyway.
On that note, we'll be back next week. Talk to you then. Bye for now.
And it's a good night.